So this is session 4 of 5 on community organizing around sharing local history. With this one, we're going to focus on doing sessions for big groups and festivals, and we hear from some folks on some of the things that have worked or have not worked on that. And particularly, we sort of start out with how the objectives might differ here. And I want to start with this one, actually. One of the funnest events that I've taken part in recently was the history hackathon that we did at the California Historical Society as part of the Year of the Bay project and the Curating the Bay exhibit that was happening there. And the idea is, I mean, we do a lot of times I personally am out doing kind of talks and lectures, sharing the work that people are doing around the world. For this one, the idea was to really get people talking themselves. And so our format was one in which we had about 12 photos that Carrie had put together that we didn't know much about. And the idea was to kind of use this history mysteries idea to solve some of those. So it was really designed to be very interactive and exciting. And kind of we talk about the objectives and how that might be different. For us, the objective here was, on one hand, to gather a little bit of more information about this content, but mainly to make it fun and accessible and give the ownership of these kind of historical assets to the public a little bit. I think that was very successful. So I'm wondering if any of you have had these kinds of experiences, what's worked in this situation, and things that maybe haven't worked or that you would improve upon if you were going to do this kind of thing again later. And Rebecca, I know you guys have done a few of these recently around the Art on the Map one, things like that. What do you think?
Certainly projectors, very useful tools because they enable you to have quite a big group looking at something similar, and if you pick your images well to be ones that people might be able to connect with in different ways, that can be a good way of sparking conversation. And I think particularly you talked a bit about dialogue and conversation. I think establishing a genuine need. So at a traditional lecture, somebody's talking about what they know, but with some of our bigger events, we're saying, look, this is a photo that the museum doesn't know about, we don't know about, but we think you might do. Can you help us? Is a really good way of getting people involved. It does need to be a genuine question. You can sometimes pose things that actually the museum knows the answer to. So that's important. And you can also veer into making something too specific or too difficult that really the answer comes back, well, you need an expert for that. So thinking a lot about the material that you're sharing and investing time in kind of picking and curating that so that it's the right stimulus material is important, and using things like projectors, like printouts, things for people to write notes on themselves to kind of capture some of that information, because that tends to be the most difficult part at a big event. Is one of your objectives, and probably the one that you reach most easily, is getting people excited and interested, because they can browse Historypin, it's a cool idea, they can find out more about the project. But if you're actually trying to capture a story or information, that's trickier. So one way of doing that might be getting people to write notes on a piece of paper. One way might be making sure that if you hear somebody make a comment, one of your team notes it down. So there's a mixture of ways that you can handle that.
One of the things that I was surprised about in some of these history mysteries is how, and I guess this was perhaps accidental by design, but how few pieces of content we actually work through. I know we were set up to do probably 20 in this hour-and-a-half session that we did at California Historical Society. I think we only got through 9. Which was fine because you had people up interacting with the content. They were standing around the projector screen trying to figure things out, and most importantly, talking to one another and hearing the stories from each other. Where did you get that piece of information? What was that like there? I wonder if that's been the same for some of the stuff that you guys have done over there, or if you're able to kind of get through a lot of content in an hour or 2-hour session.
It can depend on how you structure the event. So we've done some where it's been a group working through stuff collaboratively, and in that environment, people being able to bring their own devices is really useful. So laptops, iPads, to be doing their own kind of research and then chipping into the group. That definitely helps move things along. We did do one session where the first half was more kind of people working together. The second half we explicitly set up as a competition and said, which group can work through the most. So I think if you phrase it in a more competitive way, you might work through more material. But again, that probably comes back very closely to your objective of whether you're trying to solve lots of mysteries or whether you're trying to, get people chatting and interacting in different ways. I think probably at Historypin we're kind of leaning more towards people exchanging information and working together on something rather than competing to process as much material as possible. But that's definitely something to think about with your audience. It may be if you're working with, 15-year-old boys, that's exactly the kind of motivation to get them doing stuff and researching and learning a whole load of new skills. But with, a small local history society, maybe you don't want them having a kind of cutthroat competition.
Yeah, Carrie, you've played around a bit with the kind of pub quiz idea, right, of what that might look like, and so how you would want to have teams that are very intergenerational. What do you
Hmm.
think? I don't know that that's happened yet, but I love some of your ideas around this. Can you say a few words about that?
Yeah, it's just pub quizzes are so fun. All to me, anyways, and something I really miss about the UK. And it's just something to really get people together and be competitive. And um, so we haven't, as John said, I had experience kind of doing this yet, but in the future, we really want to experiment with this kind of game-like structure for an event that can be really fun and engaging, as opposed to, putting a mystery photo up, for example, and just having people kind of say out the answers. Like for the hackathon, for example, at the California Historical Society, these were this is a group of people that were not familiar with each other. I would say half was the regular membership base of the California Historical Society, and the other half were kind of hackers and mappers and people used to going to hackathons. So those people were they came prepared with their computers and kind of research materials. And so those people, for example, were comfortable kind of looking stuff up, and they had access to the research material and yelling stuff out, for example. So in a big group, that doesn't always lend itself to collaboration if you don't get people into groups and kind of have that kind of incentive game-like structure like Rebecca was mentioning before. I think that would be really helpful, and kind of the pub quiz format would something really fun to experiment with, especially in big groups that aren't kind of familiar with each other. Yeah, I recommend that.
Has anyone? I wonder if anyone's had experience recently with festival type things where you've got a ton of people. I think Natalie at Queen's Library had some really good insights on the World Trade. I think it was the World's Fair festival that they were doing, where there were. I mean, I think there were thousands of people there probably, and so they were they were trying to collect some things, but mainly they saw it as kind of a scattershot approach. Has anyone been involved in anything like that recently, and kind of how you've approached it differently, or how you prepared yourself for that?
So I would say that with that kind of environment, you've got a very small window of people's attention. So you kind of want to have almost your best piece of content to show to them, so they immediately get it. They get your project, they're excited. And what tends to work well is, if you know that you're in a particular local environment, having content, sourcing content in advance, putting it up, that people will be able to resonate with. And often they'll say, oh, but I want to search my street, and their street is somewhere small and far away and doesn't have any content. But getting them in with, an amazing story or amazing picture, so when they leave your stall after a couple of minutes, they're left thinking, that's a really cool project. I want to go home, dig into it more, find out more about it, get involved. Whereas if you try to just kind of explain your whole project, or don't have a really exciting hook, you'll just kind of drift into the background. So I would say that kind of preparation again of spending the time seeking out amazing bits of content or amazing stories, or potentially, having somebody there who's shared a story. So if you've been running a project for a while and you've got someone who's contributed a whole bunch of images and, engaging with the project where he hasn't before, that's your example of this is what we're doing. We're connecting with people. So those would be a couple of pieces of advice for that kind of environment.